Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Murudo, and today we are going to be talking about hidden shadows. We're going to delve deep into the issue of childhood trauma and how it affects individuals in childhood, in adulthood, throughout their lives. So basically, in every child's life, there are these intricate things, these little things that can occur that we basically are unaware of, that they might actually affect the child's life. There's things like trauma, there's things like abuse, there's things like physical abuse, neglect, having huge responsibilities thrust upon these little children. Imagine a girl called Tariro. In the early ages of her life, she was exposed to domestic violence. The mom is always being beaten, she is beaten, sometimes scolded for things that she doesn't understand. This child is going to grow up with the trauma of the constant violence. She's going to find it difficult to trust. She's going to find it difficult to form emotional connections just because of that trauma that she's experienced. Let's take, for instance, a boy, Simba. Simba was thrust with responsibilities at an early age. He had to take care of his siblings, look for a job, start working. These children and other children like them experience what we call childhood trauma. Childhood trauma is basically any situation, instance, words that are said to a child that make it difficult for them to cope, that cause them psychological distress. So contrary to popular belief, most of us believe, they're just children. They're not going to feel anything. It doesn't affect them at all. They know nothing. But guess what? This child also has emotions. These children also have feelings. These children are also going to grow up to be adults with all this weight upon their shoulders. So why is it important to deal with childhood trauma, to avoid childhood trauma? It's because it colors the present in the child's life, and it also has a huge impact on their future. So what does childhood trauma look like? What really is it? Because you might be wondering, did I go through childhood trauma? Am I traumatizing my child? So childhood trauma basically is anything that disrupts the child's quality of life, something that makes it difficult for them to cope. There's physical abuse. Maybe the child is being beaten up, they're being injured, and being put in situations where they're likely to be physically injured. There's also verbal abuse, offensive language, scolding this child, telling them you're worthless, you're worth nothing, you will amount to nothing. That is all verbal abuse, which can also count as psychological and emotional abuse. There is also neglect, not providing the basic needs for this child. They don't have food, they don't have shelter, they don't have clothing, they are not well watched over, they're not taken care of. There's also getting huge responsibilities on these children, like the example of Simba I spoke about earlier on, who now has this responsibility of the whole family when they're just a child and they're supposed to also be taken care of. That also counts as abuse. There's a whole lot of examples, a whole list of examples of what childhood trauma is. But the ultimate thing is most of us have at some point experienced some of these traumas. And as we would have it, once someone experiences these traumas, they're likely to affect them in childhood, as I alluded to earlier on. But the bigger picture is when they grow to be an adult, they are still going to carry these emotions. So what happens with our mind is we can look at it as a compartmentalized system, whereby we've got the things that we're always in constant communication with, which is our conscious, the now. And we've got the subconscious. You're not in constant communication with it. It's not constantly being seen, but it harbors most of these experiences. from when you were a baby, from when you were breastfeeding, from when you were calling out for your mom and she was responding or not responding, from when you were being neglected and being given these nasty comments. The subconscious carries all of it, and it influences your conscious in a way. When the child is going through all these traumas, they store them in the subconscious, number one. But secondly, the most important is the brain chemistry is also affected by these things. So the constant exposure to the stress response and the stress hormones is definitely going to change the neurobiology of the brain and definitely going to heighten the stress response. So that's why most of these adults who've been exposed to trauma are going to have things like anxiety disorders. They're going to have post-traumatic stress disorders. They are likely to also have things like depression, to use substance use disorders, alcohol use disorders, drugs, and all of these other things. That is because the brain has been affected. Someone might say, what if they don't get mental illness? They're still going to get other psychological issues as a result of the trauma that they experienced. So it is paramount, it is important to safeguard wherever we can our children, to safeguard their psychological well-being. Yes, they're children, but they're going to be the adults of tomorrow. How do we safeguard this? By having policies in place that protect children from harmful and traumatic experiences, by having parenting skills or parenting styles that foster understanding in children, that foster listening, that give children an open platform to express themselves when they experience these things, and we can react in good time. And as an adult, you might ask, okay, I've already gone through these experiences, I'm already an adult, I'm already distressed, I don't know what to do. The good news is help is everywhere. In social network, at church, homes, professional circles, and also there's professional mental health personnel ready to help. So your social network will help with social support, you get people to speak to bounce off the distress, basically to be able to say out, to speak out the things that are distressing you. And then professionals are in their different levels and different aspects. We've got counselors, systemic counselors, psychologists, and then there's also the psychiatrists who are doctors who then come in, especially when there is need for treatment, for example, for things like depression, PTSD, all those illnesses that can arise as a result of childhood trauma. But ultimately, the take-home message is children are human beings too. Children experience trauma. Children have got psychological responses to trauma. They've got behavioral responses to trauma. They've got emotional responses to trauma. And at times you might just say, this child is naughty, they behave in certain ways, but they're just exhibiting their traumatic experiences. And it is important to be watchful and to react in time so that we foster the next generation of mentally healthy adults.